Welcome to Andy Staples on 3, our first live edition. We've already got people in the chat, Jesse Simonton. We've already got people arguing about what USC is going to do, not even in the conference it's in.
In the Big Ten. Let's
we've
wait
got
a year.
B. Hunter saying, brother, please, USC is going to dominate the Big Ten. They've got to play another season in the Pac-12 first, guys.
2017, last time they won. Is this the year, Andy?
It might be, and we're going to talk about USC and the Pac-12 and its responsibility to West Coast football, as Lincoln Riley put it the other day, which I actually found fascinating and very interesting, correct, but also probably insulting to other teams on the West Coast. But we can talk about that. B. Hunter saying they already own the Pac. No, actually, that would be Utah, which has won it how many times in a row? Two times in a row, inclling
how many times did they beat USC last year? 1, 2?
Oh, yeah, 2. That's right. So, but the Pac-12 is a very good place to start today, Jesse, because Pac-12 Media Day was Friday. We didn't have a show on Friday. Of course, this is the conference that does the Media Day news dump. They do the Media Day on Friday. But
in Vegas, where every single team is featured.
Yes.
And reporters sit on couches. You know, I mean, it's an incredible scene.
Do not act jealous because you weren't there, because you didn't get that assignment. I understand. Like, when I saw the video, I was just like, okay, I'm covering this next year. I have really screwed this up. So we got to take a look at it, though, because there was a conscious decision made at Pac-12 Media Days, and George Kliavkoff talked about this, and he actually had a session where he talked about, he said, just ask me questions about the other stuff now, because then we're going to move on to football. But as people were asking about the other stuff, which would be media rights deal, are you worried about losing anybody? What the heck happened with San Diego State? All that stuff. He gave a very interesting answer. So we will hand the floor over to our friend Richard Johnson from Sports Illustrated. This is him asking George Kliavkoff a question on Friday.
Is it at all frustrating for you personally or professionally that despite what you're trying to push, the football, the quarterbacks, that you're still dealing with questions about media rights timeline and stuff like that in the midst of all that?
I don't consider it frustrating. It's a reinforcement for me of what dedicated and passionate fans we have and how much people care about college athletics. And I get it. And at the same time, I don't want the opportunity to be missed today to talk about football. We're not announcing a media deal on purpose today because I want the focus to be on football.
Whoa! That sounds like huge news. We're not announcing a media deal today because we want to focus on football. There's an implication there, Jesse.
There certainly is, which is what makes this follow-up question particularly of interest.
So we go to James Crepea of the Oregonian, and I love James.
He will hammer a commissioner.
Yes.
He will hammer a commissioner.
James makes every question sound like he's trying to crack Watergate open, whether it's when he was covering the Auburn beat, whether it's Gus Malzahn talking about their backup running back, or if he's asking Rob Mullins about softball scholarship equivalencies. Like, it's all serious. And
he came in throwing heat last year at the SEC spring meetings when he was covering Oregon, and he was basically asking Sankey all these insane questions about realignment and the potential interest in the Oregon Ducks. So yeah, he knows how to hit it.
Well, this was a great question, though, because
it was what
Kliavkoff said does lend itself to this next question that James Crepea asked.
George, just to follow on what you just said, I think a response ago, because it caught a lot of people's attention very quickly. You just said you're not announcing a deal today on purpose because you want the attention to be on football.
Yep.
To be clear, that would imply that the deal is done and codified and just you're waiting until after today.
I think you're reading too much into that.
So then what is the purpose behind not announcing something, which is what you just said?
We want to have the focus on football today. We have an incredibly good football story to tell, and we want that to be the focus today.
You know what this is, Andy?
What's that?
This is the Always Sunny in Philadelphia, like Galaxy Brain, where he's like, pinning the thing here and doing the thing there, and it's like, we're distracting it here to. I mean, it's like this is just an all-time Galaxy Brain take by Kliavkoff.
Why would you say what you said before if you didn't think that next question was coming?
And we wonder why the Pac-12 is having these negotiating rights issues. If this is the sort of logic that they're entering these negotiations with, no wonder they're getting Charlie Brown at the end zone every time.
Here's the thing: we don't know if they are. One, right now, what they're saying is, no, the longer we wait, the better it gets, which also sounds a little counterintuitive. But I do think this was a PR miscalculation by them that goes back quite some time.
Since like December.
Right.
We've been doing this dance since like December.
Right. Here's why this is important. It's important because they've got to get a TV deal, or the league members have to figure out what happens to them next year. Like, they have to have a deal to stay together as a league. They want to, clearly. They keep saying that. So here's the thing. They can sign that deal and get that deal done. Really, they got a couple more months realistically to get it done. And so they'll be fine if they have a deal by October or by the beginning of November. But their problem is they kept moving the timeline themselves. If they had gotten up last December, or even after the Big 12 did its deal, if they'd said, hey, we have a timeline, we're not going to push anything, we plan to be done by the end of calendar year 2023. That's probably maybe a little too close for comfort for the schools that have to make their plans, but it's all right. You can do that and have a deal. We didn't get the deal announcement on the Big 10 contract, which starts this year. We didn't get that until the end of August last year. So it's possible that they could push this a little bit later, and it's fine, but they should have just said that instead of going, no, we're going to get it done in the spring, and then have the Arizona president say, it should be done in the next 3 weeks, next month. And then they keep pushing it forward. It makes it look like they don't know what they're doing, even if they actually do.
Exactly. The slow drip of all this is why, it just optically speaking has been a poor strategy from the start. Where do you think this is going to ultimately land, though? Do you think this is going to be kind of a multi, media deal where maybe ESPN takes some of the best games so they still have a little Pac-12 after dark inventory? Maybe you get a streamer involved, it doesn't seem like Apple or Amazon really wants to pay for the full cart. So maybe they just buy a couple games. It seems like maybe some of the holdup in these negotiations is that it's going to be kind of a multi-pronged approach.
I would think so. I would think so. And I've always thought ESPN is going to probably jump in at the end because they do need West Coast inventory. They need to fill that time slot Friday night and Saturday night. Now, the Big 12 may be able to get some of those Friday slots in the late start spot in Provo, but that you can't get a whole season's worth of that.
Right.
Because BYU plays road games. So, and also you probably want to have BYU play a couple Saturday games at home. So I do think somebody's got to fill those spots for ESPN. The Pac-12 is the logical choice for that. So that I would assume they come back at some point and say, hey, okay, here's what we're willing to pay. This is what we want. But yeah, I don't know exactly how the rest of it works. And nobody does because the news is not getting out. There's like 2 people in the room when they're talking about it. So anybody who tells you they do is lying. But the one thing that you've seen as a shift is the San Diego State thing. The San Diego State sends that letter to the Mountain West, says we're exiting the conference next year. And then they're like, whoa,
just
no, we're not.
kidding.
Yeah. So that tells you that perhaps the shape of the deal changed and maybe staying at 10 is more advantageous than moving to 12. And streamers want inventory. Linear TV wants quality, not necessarily quantity. So,
and if we're doing a little conspiracy, kind of thinking out loud here, you and I discussed the comments that Colorado's president made last week the San Diego State thing could be tied into a little bit of the fact that, hey, maybe there is confidence or optimism that Colorado is going to stay in the Pac-12, thereby the conference is like, hey, we'll hit pause on, some realignment. We're not looking to push just to push.
Yeah. So Jesse, later in the show, in a few minutes, we're going to do our quarterback draft, where we each get to pick 10 quarterbacks from the best in the country. And there's a pretty deep list. It's especially deep in the Pac-12, which is what George Kliavkoff wanted us to talk about.
Focus on football, Andy.
Let's talk about football in the Pac-12. It'll get us warmed up for the quarterback draft, because a lot of these teams have QBs that we're going to be picking. But let's hear from Lincoln Riley, because he said something at Pac-12 Media Day that I found really interesting.
I think coaching or playing at USC is one of the great responsibilities in our sport. I mean, the program is so important to the support, to the sport, to the success of football on the West Coast in general, and has such a great history that I think we should all see it like that, right? Like we're not owed the opportunity to do what we do at a place like USC. It's an honor to do it at that place. It's a great responsibility, and we want a team full of players and a staff room full of people that see it that way. And
I think that's a really good way to look at it if you're USC. I think that's Lincoln Riley saying, hey, the last time a West Coast team was dominant was USC under Pete Carroll, that it's possible to have a West Coast team that's a year in, year out national title contender. Now, I would argue if there's a 14 playoff, Chip Kelly's Oregon would have probably been that. Now, Oregon made the national championship game twice since USC has made it, but it feels like the last time there was a real threat for a West Coast team to win the national title and then be kind of dynastic was USC. So that makes sense for him to say that, but man, it would piss me off if I was Oregon or Washington.
Or Utah. I mean,
Utah.
The fact that Utah has been like the little brother out there, and yet they've won the league the last 2 years. Kyle Whittingham probably does more with less, than any coach in the country. But the reason, what Riley is saying is true. And, there's been been kind of a power vacuum out west ever since USC fell off, which is how the Alabamas and the Georgias and some of these other schools have gone out there and just raided the West Coast with the best players. If Riley can convince most of those guys, not just the quarterbacks, but, some of the other defensive backs and skill guys to stay home, that's the quickest way USC is going to turn around, because then he's going to recruit some defensive linemen from Texas, maybe from the Midwest, now that they're obviously in the Big Ten in 24. And that's how you kind of rebuild the Trojans.
Well, and they've kind of already done that. They did it through the transfer portal a little bit. The body types they're getting now through the portal look very different. You've seen Anthony Lucas, who came from A&M, who's from Arizona originally. Bear Alexander, who played for Georgia last year. He's there now at USC. So
poor Jed Fish, he saw his best three players get just hop over from Arizona to USC.
Billy Napier at Florida lost a couple. Ethan White didn't end up landing there, but Michael Tarquin is going to be their starting left tackle, it sounds like. So it is. They've become a destination again under Lincoln Riley, and that's what that is what it should be. Interesting comment from Renee. And this was our first comment. This was before the show even started. Renee, let's remind ourselves that the Pac-12 conference literally plays zero defense, so it's easy to put up offensive stats against those defenseless teams and win the Heisman. Throwing a little shade at Caleb Williams. Sorry, Caleb Williams deserves the Heisman. He's really good. I'm going to give you a spoiler alert for the quarterback draft. Whichever one of us wins the best of three rock, paper, scissors we're going to do is taking Caleb Williams.
Yeah, slam dunk. To her point, I will say, this is not a demerit against Caleb Williams. It's a bigger narrative, obviously, about USC. It's can they play defense? Last year they relied solely on turnovers. They led, I think, the nation or Pac-12, in takeaways, but they ranked in 100s nationally in, total defense, yards per play, scoring. We both wrote columns, I think, after just their, apoplectic showing in the bowl game, where Caleb Williams threw for like 500 yards and 6 touchdowns, and it wasn't enough to beat Tulane.
Yeah.
And I know Tulane's really good, but still.
They should have been able to pull off, but they could not. Speaking of which, where's Where's Michael Pratt?
Michael
gonna go in
Pratt,
our
yeah.
quarterback draft.
Yeah.
But this
Florida
is gonna
wishes he was down here in Gainesville.
Well, you mentioned Florida. Here's something that the Gator people will probably be interested in. Another thing that happened at Pac-12 Media Day, Cam Rising represented Utah there, their quarterback who injured his knee in the Rose Bowl. Kyle Whittingham gave an update. So Brant Queethy, the tight end, who's really good, he's probably going to be ready for the start of the season. But Cam Rising, Whittingham said it's going to come down to the wire for that Thursday night season opener against Florida at Rice-Eccles Stadium. So I would love to see Cam Rising in that game. I'm so excited for what Utah can be again, because I feel like we keep forgetting them. They keep just winning the league. And
their schedule is brutal this year. I will say that. If you're kind of playing the win-loss game between them, I think you and I agree that the 4 contenders in the Pac-12 are probably USC, Utah, Washington, Oregon, with UCLA maybe a dark horse, because UCLA's schedule,
maybe
Oregon State. Yeah, I think UCLA's schedule is probably the most favorable of that group when you kind of, because it really comes down to, do you play all these other teams? Some of them don't, and do you get the luxury of getting the bottom teams, which is Stanford, Colorado, and Arizona? If you draw those 3,
faith in Coach Prime from you. Come on.
Well, we'll see. Year one, we'll see.
Well, we're gonna find out. The UCLA, I don't know.
We don't know who's playing quarterback.
UCLA's quarterback will get drafted, because we don't really know who UCLA's quarterback is going to be. Could it be Dante Moore?
I do not think he's going to get drafted.
Yeah,
Ethan Garbers.
Ethan Garbers, Colin Schlee, the Kent State transfer. So we don't know who that's going to be. We're not entirely sure who Oregon State's is going to be. Everybody's assuming DJ Uiagalelei.
I think Aiden Childs is going to end up taking that job. That freshman seems to have garnered a bunch of buzz this offseason. I really like, Jonathan Smith out there. I just think they're going to naturally regress a little bit.
Do we know about Shedeur Sanders? Where?
Yeah, is he on your board? He's not on mine. I'll key little background information. He's not on mine.
Ooh.
Top 20 quarterbacks. I don't have Shedeur on there.
He could be. We don't know as he jumps up in competition.
Absolutely. He may emerge as a top 20 guy by season's end. But if I'm if I'm betting on projection, I have some other guys I think I'm gonna, tip the scales for.
So
what do you think about Washington this year? What's got like where
Michael Penix Jr.'s back? They got receivers, they got pass rushers, It feels like that Washington-Oregon game is going to be massive again. And that was one really when Bo Nix got hurt late in that game at a very critical moment, and it feels like it swung that thing. And
Dan Lanning got just 4th down happy, like he was like Les Miles, like, riverboat gambling out there, and it backfired considerably.
Yeah, there was a lot of Dan Lanning first-year coach kind of stuff that went on late last season that I think probably gets corrected.
I agree.
The game management at the end of the Washington game, the defense unable to stop the run at the end of the Oregon State game. Like
inside zone to death.
Oregon is playing for the Pac-12 championship, if not for any of the, not for what we're talking about, and potentially
not USC.
Right.
Yeah, they would have been a USC spot. I think it's going to be, because I think so many of these teams are kind of muddled together. USC clearly has the upside because of Caleb, because of the transfers. One of the transfers we didn't mention was Mason Cobb, all Big 12 linebacker from Oklahoma State. I think they have the highest upside of these, 4 or 5 teams. But I think the Pac-12 is going to be so fun this year is because really on any given Saturday, I think all these teams can beat each other. And so there may not be a playoff contender in a 4-team field that emerges from this conference, because they may all end up having two losses by the end of the regular season.
Yeah, we don't know what channels they're going to be on next year, but we do know what channels they're on right now. And
you may not have that channel, but
well, I think the games we want to see will be on the ones we have. The Pac-12 network games might not be so great, but I am excited. I'm looking at Washington's schedule right now. Brutal turn in November where they're at USC, and then Utah comes to Seattle, and then they turn around and go to Corvallis. Like, that's rough.
How many conference games you got Deion winning in year one?
We
got to talk Deion.
Well, yes, and Deion was not at Pac-12 Media Days
Pac-12
because he was having that medical procedure. Hopefully he's doing better and ready to go. So they are not welcoming Deion to the Pac-12 with the nicest schedule, because the first 2 conference games for the Buffaloes at Oregon, USC comes to Boulder.
I mean, and this is after they opened with TCU and Nebraska.
Right.
They're playing 11 Power 5 games. They're playing, and that's the thing, is that Colorado may have, Deion Sanders has seriously upgraded that roster by just completely burning it to the ground and bringing in 70 new players from last year to this season. The issue is your depth could get sapped by the first month of the season.
Right.
Where even though you start playing some of these more winnable games late in the year, you just may not have the sheer bodies that you thought you were going to have.
And that's where your October 28th at UCLA, November 4th, Oregon State in Boulder. Then you turn around and play Arizona. Like, those are going to be really hard by that point in the season. They're probably going to be pretty hard anyway, but especially by that point in the season. So they're going to have to hope they have some injury luck, stay healthy. And if they can, then you see the fruits of the upgraded roster lasting longer. The problem is that, again, they are thrown into the deep end of the Pac-12 immediately.
I'll tell you another underlining concern I have for Colorado. Because, again, I think a lot of the guys that Deion has brought in have been quality transfers that, maybe they were contributors or some were even starters at some of these other schools. But the day he announced that Shedeur was the starting quarterback, he killed their chances to land any other quarterback on that roster. So they don't have anybody else behind his son. Yeah. So if he gets hurt, what do they do? I think they have it's just a couple walk-ons.
Yeah, that's where you wish Colin Schlee from Kent State.
They might have a freshman.
Yeah, you wish Colin Schlee from Kent State hadn't gone to UCLA, that he'd gone to Colorado, where Sean Lewis, former Kent State coach, is the offensive coordinator. Now, interestingly enough, though, we talked about last week when we talked to Josh Heupel and we talked about Ole Miss and we talked about Oklahoma, how that offense, the old Baylor offense, has proliferated pretty much everywhere, and it's not really a secret anymore. Well, nobody else runs it in the Pac-12. So they will be the offensive changeup in the Pac-12.
And Lewis at Kent State was running it faster than any team in the country.
Yeah,
they were running more plays per game or per snap than even Josh Heupel's go system, than Levy, than several of these other guys that you said have kind of proliferated not only the SEC now but kind of throughout college football. That is a good point. That the Pac-12 it's kind of akin to the fact of what Phil Longo's doing in the Big Ten.
Wisconsin.
Yeah, that they're kind of the new kid on the block.
Where's Tanner Mordecai on your board?
I
Is
think
he on your board?
Honorable mention. I spent some time. Well, I spent a lot of time, honestly, actually, with Phil Longo earlier this spring, and that's Wisconsin's new offensive coordinator. Was responsible for recruiting Drake Maye, who obviously is on both of our boards at North Carolina. Recruited and coached up Sam Howell now at Wisconsin. He's really high on Tanner, and obviously Tanner lit up the scoreboard down at SMU. There's some other guys I have a little bit higher. All right.
Down means, Jesse, it's time.
On the clock.
Draft. Oh boy. All right.
Got my list here.
All right. And we know who's number one on your list. We know who's number one on my list. So let's figure out who's going to take that person. Let's go to the comments real quick. There's a lot of Joe Milton love in the comments. Lot of Joe Milton. Do you think, this is Vori, do you think Milton winning the Heisman, winning national championship for the Balls is a possibility?
I don't know. What say you?
We're flying Air Milton this year. Sure feels like 1998. Wow. There's a lot of Vols.
Feels like 98. Vols are feeling good.
That's right. All right. We're going to figure out who gets the first pick. And the only way to do it is the only fair way to do it. Best of 3, rock, paper, scissors. Jesse, let's go. Wait, rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Is that how we're going to do it?
Let's do it.
Rock, paper,
Rock,
scissors,
paper,
shoot.
scissors, shoot. Okay, I was paper, so you beat me.
I was scissors. I win. All right.
Yeah.
Ready to go. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
Scissors, shoot.
Both rock.
Yeah.
All right.
Rock.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
Shoot.
We're both
paper.
Rock, paper, scissors, shoot. Oh, I'm paper, he's scissors. Next one wins.
Next one wins. Let's do it.
Let's go. I'm loosening up now. All right. Rock, paper, scissors, shoot.
Boom.
Oh, Jesse's paper, I'm rock. It's over. Jesse.
This makes it more interesting too, because we kind of had a little pre-draft kind of discussion little thing here. So this will be fun because yes, I am definitely taking the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, the guy with the probably best chance. I know a lot of folks thought Bryce was maybe gonna, had a decent chance of repeating. It's really hard. Obviously only Archie Griffin is the only guy that's ever done it. But I think Caleb is certainly set up to become the second guy. So I'm taking USC quarterback Caleb Williams, number 1 overall, will be the first pick in the NFL draft in 24 too.
Here's why I think it's going to be harder for him to win the Heisman. I think it's first of all that he won the Heisman last year. Second
Fatigue,
of all,
naturally.
Right. He is the presumptive NFL number 1 overall pick, which means people will be picking him apart relentlessly from the other side of the coin. The NFL folks, the draftniks, will be picking him apart relentlessly. So I think that will creep in, and nothing short of perfection from Caleb Williams is going to win him the Heisman this year. That said, I would have gladly taken him had I won this thing, but I can't. So now
this is the interesting pick, though. Who you got? Because I think, the folks in the comments, they obviously like Joe Milton, but I think, even the casual college football fan would probably say, well, it's got to be Drake Maye.
Well,
here's Drake Maye?
Am I picking the quarterback or am I picking his supporting cast? Because if I'm picking his supporting cast, why wouldn't I pick just Kyle McCord or Carson Beck? They got great supporting casts.
You can pick whoever you want. You're believing in the quarterback based on the system, based on the talent surrounding them, based on maybe what they have or haven't done yet. So I'm curious. Where are you going with this?
I'm going to pick Drake Maye.
There you go.
I got to. He's so good. Now, the question is, Drake Maye without Josh Downs, can he be as good? We know Chip Lindsey's coming on board to run the offense. We just mentioned Phil Longo left for Wisconsin. So
we've talked about Kent State. They had that Kent State transfer that they got a bunch of buzz at receiver this spring. Harmon, I think. I'm blanking on his name, but I think he's supposed to fill in for Josh Downs as that number 1 target. So,
well, they're going to need that. They're going to need to run the ball fairly well with backs. I think one thing that hurt Sam Howell that second year as a starter, or the third year as a starter for Sam, was he had to be the whole running game too. I don't want Drake to have to be the whole running game, even though athletically he's pretty good at it. But I do think it's asking a lot of him. So, Jesse, who's your second pick?
My second pick, I am banking on the continued growth of one Jordan Travis.
Ooh.
Florida State returns as much production as any team in the country. This is a guy who's just gotten better and better. He's going to be a 6-year senior. He's surrounded by oodles of talent. Obviously, they've, bring back several quality receivers, Johnny Wilson, but then they go out and get a guy like Keon Campbell from the transfer portal, Michigan State's best receiver. They get Jaheim Bell, tight end from South Carolina. He's surrounded by a ton of dudes. He obviously could go boom or bust in terms of his Heisman odds early in the season. Depends on what happens week 1 in the game. I know you and I are both, stoked about with LSU down in Orlando, and then, middle of September, FSU goes to Clemson. So he wins one of those games. I think he's looking pretty good in terms of being a contender the rest of the season. He wins both of them. The dude's going to skyrocket up the board.
I am trying not to be influenced by the commenters here. I'm trying, because I have one pick in mind, but they are they are reminding me of a game I watched late last season that showed the kind of promise that really just, I mean, it was going to be hard for me to stay off his bandwagon. I think my son is texting me pics, by the way, outside the door. He's a big JJ McCarthy guy. Big JJ McCarthy stan. All right. Well, I just got Matthew C., who is a Georgia fan. You picked Joe Milton. You deserve to lose, Andy. I'm picking Joe Milton.
Wow.
Go Big Orange. Give me Joe Milton. No, I said during the Orange Bowl, he made a throw into the end zone, put it only where his receiver could have caught it between double coverage. And I said, he's finally gotten accurate. He's finally figured it out. Don't tell me about the Vandy game. Stop telling me about the Vandy game. I'm convincing myself that Clemson game was representative of what we're going to see from Joe Milton going forward. So give me Joe Milton.
This is all this is you sold your stock for Anthony Richardson, and now you're doubling down on Joe Milton.
Jesse, after the Utah game last year, I said Anthony Richardson will be a first-round draft pick. Was I wrong?
You were proven correct. You were proven.
I also said he'd be a Heisman finalist. I was very wrong in that one. But Joe Milton, here's the thing. This is a boom or bust pick because we have seen Joe Milton before. We saw Joe Milton at Michigan. We saw Joe Milton as a starter at Tennessee get supplanted by Hendon Hooker because he airmails the ball quite a bit because he's got an arm that is stronger than most arms we've ever seen. Like, I don't know. I really don't know if there are any quarterbacks in the NFL with a stronger arm than Joe Milton. I do know there are significantly more quarterbacks in the NFL with a more accurate arm than Joe Milton. But if he can be accurate in that offense, it's going to be very difficult to stop. So I'm going Joe Milton. Jesse, who you got next?
Let's just earmark this for when it's like week 6 and they're Tennessee fans
and they're chanting for Nico. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it.
Yeah. All right, I'm choosing a dude that I can't believe is still left on the board because I was debating picking between 1 and 2, or not 1 and 2, 2 and 3 here. I'm going back to the Pac-12. Give me Michael Penix, baby. I'm a southpaw.
You blew it.
I'm a southpaw. He's a southpaw. You can take Bo Nix. I'm taking Michael Penix. He's got 2 1,000-yard receivers around him, and that's not even the best one. The freshman Polk a year ago was probably the most dynamic and explosive guy in this offense. I'm a Kalen DeVore believer. I think Penix is going to have a monster senior season. This is a guy, but this is what NIL is all about. He was able to come back to school because he was not going to be a first or second round pick a year ago. We'll see if he can work his way into this, but this is not an NFL draft discussion. This is a college football quarterback draft. The guy led the nation in passing. Give me the southpaw. Huskies, baby.
That's fine. I'm good with that.
You're taking McCarthy. Go for it.
I'm not taking my son's going to keep texting me to take McCarthy.
Your son's blowing you up for it.
And I believe that's a good pick in a few picks. One of us is going to take JJ McCarthy, but not yet. I'm taking Bo Nix. Until he got dinged up in the Washington game last year, Jesse, he was tracking stat-wise for a season that was almost identical to Marcus Mariota's 2014 Heisman season. This is a guy with more weapons around him. I think their defense is going to be better, so he's not going to have to be Superman all the time. I think there's a really good chance he puts together a fabulous season, and he winds up standing there in New York with that trophy. Which, by the way,
the guy had 45 touchdowns a year ago, so he's certainly, he's capable of hitting the 50 burger. I think that's for sure.
If you had
no one has done better getting a fresh start, that's for sure.
Yeah, if you'd come to me 3 years ago and said you're going to be picking Bo Nix here, I'd have said, wait, how is Bo Nix still in college? Because you only get 4 years of eligibility. What worldwide catastrophe caused this? And why is he in Oregon? So, but that's where we're at. I really do think he's going to have a good year. All right, Jesse, who's up?
All right, in an ode to your ex co-host, the well-acclaimed Ari Wasserman, hook 'em, baby. I'm betting projection. Give me Quinn Ewers cut the mullet. The dude is surrounded by more talent than any wide receiving core, pass catching core, however you want to delineate it, in college football.
Disagree. Disagree. That person's name is coming up, but it's not Quinn Ewers.
Nah, give me Saunders is the best tight end, not named Brock Bowers. The guy has A.D. Mitchell, Xavier Worthy, Isaiah Nair, who didn't even play last year, was considered one of the Boone transfers a year ago out of Wyoming. All the scuttle coming out of Austin right now is that the kid has just really matured, that he's, really focused on improving his footwork. He's, shored up some of the mechanics. Steve Sarkisian, I'm not sold on him as a head coach. The guy can't win 10 games at one of these blue blood programs. If he's going to, it certainly seems like it's going to be this year with a guy like a trigger man in Quinn Ewers, who held off all the hype with Arch Manning. Malik Murphy looked awesome in the spring. Yet it's the former number 1 overall recruit that's going to hold the reins down. Hook 'em.
I'm glad you said that, because now I can take the guy whose team's going to be 12-0, who's playing behind the best offensive line in college football, who has incredible receiving or pass catching talent, because they're not all wide receivers. Some of them are tight ends, including the best tight end in the country, Brock Bowers. I'm going Carson Beck, baby.
That's a good pick. That's a good pick. And that fits your brand too, because you've been hyping him up for the Heisman. I like that.
If he has a terrible first 2 games and Brock Vandegrift winds up starting, I look like a moron, but I got a good feeling about this one.
No, I think Beck's going to be a stud. You're right that he is, when you factor in the offensive line and just the team, how the rest of the team is kind of assembled. Certainly he is set up even better than Quinn Ewers. He looked really good in mop-up duty last year from, in some spot games. And even then he got, he basically played half the national championship game against TCU because they were beating him so bad. So, and then Fred McGriff got nominated for the Hall of Fame today. I got a little Fred McGriff like bobblehead here, Crime Dog.
Yep.
Got a little bobblehead here. Maybe that should be Carson Beck's nickname. See, Crime Dog. I like that.
Oh, it could be. Now, does he have any Tom Emanski videos? That's what really matters with Fred McGriff. All right, Jesse, who's your next guy?
All right. So I'm kind of between two ferns here on am I going to make a similar pick like you just did, choose a guy who hasn't really done it yet, but is going to be surrounded by tons of talent.
The best receiving core in America, that guy?
Yeah. Or do I go with the rival and the quarterback who beat him last year?
Ooh. I know a certain person in my house who would like to do that.
Your son clearly is a Wolverine, but I'm sticking with the brand. I think the Buckeyes, Ryan Day, give me Kyle McCord.
Jesse, I don't know if you know this, but Kyle McCord was Marvin Harrison Jr.'s high school quarterback. That is going to be the Tim Tebow and Riley Cooper, our roommates of 2023.
Or Matthew Stafford and Clayton Kershaw used to be pitcher catcher.
Went to the same high school. Exactly. Yes.
Went to the same high school. Used to be pitcher catcher. Yeah. Yeah. I think we're going to hear that a time or two from, Gus Johnson and Joel Klatt. But this is a guy, again, we're betting these two picks, the fact that you went Carson and I'm going Kyle, it makes sense because these are guys that it is the system and the infrastructure that they're surrounded by. Both of them were blue chip quarterbacks. Both of them have bided their time, especially in the day and age when these guys are transferring at the first sign of not being given a job. I just think the upside's there. Again, I could look stupid if Devin Brown ends up, 33, comes in and steals the deal, but I don't think that's going to be the case.
All right. I am trying to figure this out because this is how deep this quarterback group is. I feel like I got a bunch of really good choices.
I got a ton of dudes.
I'm going to really regret who I leave off.
Yeah.
I'm going with a guy who has a very deep receiving core, is surrounded by a lot of talent, who really we watched kind of grow over last season in his new place where he'd been a 3-year starter before that and had regressed each season. He progressed through last season. So I'm predicting an even bigger jump for LSU quarterback Jaden Daniels.
I like it.
Yeah, Jay.
I mean, and it sticks with the brand too, because now this is 3 straight picks where the backup could end up taking the job. So when Garrett Nussmeier comes in, this is we're killing it with like, hey, are we drafting QB rooms? If we're doing that in the last 3 picks, we're slaying this draft. But I like it. I mean, I think Jaden Daniels is going to be. He certainly is set up. I love, Malik Neighbors is probably the best receiver in the SEC, and the kid they got from Alabama, Anderson's going to be really good. Brian Thomas. I mean, they got a lot of really good. Mason Taylor, the tight end. LSU's loaded.
Yeah, I really am excited about what he can do because, I thought about his whole Arizona State arc. He was really good as a true freshman. You thought, okay, how great can this guy be? And they got worse and worse. Well, you go back and look. His freshman year, he had Brandon Ayuk and Eno Benjamin and Frank Darby. They had some talent around him in the skill positions that they didn't have those other 2 years. And then he gets to LSU, and they're kind of feeling their way around, letting him run around a little bit. But you saw kind of mid-season last year where he found himself as a passer in that offense. And now they've really beefed up their depth at receiver. You saw Mason Taylor, develop as a tight end last year. Obviously the huge 2-point conversion against Alabama. But
he also,
Daniels,
I mean, to back your point, this is a guy who I think last year was like the best scrambling quarterback in all of college football. And so the fact that he adds that element to the game, plus being surrounded by, this talent, that's a good pick. And you're right. This board's so deep. I mean, when we wrap up the draft, we can run through a couple names that'll be like, wow, how did these guys not get picked? I'm between 2 guys again. A guy who probably has thrown more touchdowns than any quarterback in all of college football, playing for a new school in 2023. Or a guy that just won the Big Ten championship, and I'm going to take J.J. McCarthy. Tell your son he's off the board. Play the fight song. Back-to-back Ohio State, Michigan showdown. This is a guy, former 5-star. I think he certainly teased his potential throughout last season, and we finally saw the culmination of all of his talents and skills in that Ohio State game. Consistency is going to be the name of the game for J.J. I think it sounds like they're going to run him a little bit more this year, which is interesting. I'm not crazy about the receiver weapons, but there's enough talent there. He obviously has a 1-2 punch at running back, and they'll throw the ball a ton to both Edwards and Corum. So give me JJ. We'll see if he can win back-to-back Big Ten titles and kind of slay the dragon that is Ohio State for 3rd year in a row for the Big Wolverines.
Yeah, JJ's probably not going to put up the biggest numbers in the world because they will happily run for 400 yards if somebody will let them. But in the games that they're going to need him, we saw it last year. I mean, he certainly has the talent. And this is a 5-star guy. This is Dane Brugler, who I used to host a draft podcast with at The Athletic, loves him, says the NFL people love his tools. So I think this is a really good pick. And I think I'm going to go with the guy that you were weighing against, J.J. McCarthy, not too far away over in South Bend. Wake Forest transfer Sam Hartman. He's at Notre Dame now. He'll be playing behind the best offensive line he's ever played behind. He'll be playing with the best backs he's ever played with. I'm not sure if he's playing with better receivers than he played with at Wake Forest. That's going to be a really interesting question, but we'll see him in a different system than the slow mesh. Jared Parker, the new offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, we'll see what he can get out of Sam Hartman. But this guy has been around the block. We've seen him in big games. We've seen him deal with very ferocious defenses. He's not scared when he's playing against a bunch of draft picks at Clemson. And so I think he can really elevate the Fighting Irish.
He's another guy too, Andy, that this is emblematic of kind of the progression of college football where he's allowed to stick around because of NIL. He probably would have gone pro otherwise because, he would have at least made some money, but he's not
going to make a roster. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. He would have made a roster, but now he can really cash in for 1 year. Boom. See if you can improve your stock. See if you can kind of showcase your different skills in a new offense. Now, I think Sam Hartman is going to be, dynamite there.
So you got 4 more picks. What you got?
Well, one of our prerequisites for this draft is you have to take a G5 quarterback. Give me the best one. We teased his name earlier. I'm taking Michael Pratt.
Yeah,
this is a guy that several.
You don't have to say you have to take a G5 quarterback because there's a bunch that are in consideration here.
Right, and this is a guy that there were several Power 5 programs, including the one down here in Gainesville, that were quite interested in Tulane's quarterback. They lost Spears, but they returned most of their receivers, a lot of offensive linemen. This is a guy who led, the Green Wave to their best season in school history. Willie Fritz, that offense, I think he's going to put up big numbers again. He's a guy that has legitimate NFL traits. He's a guy that I think if he has a similar season of what he did a year ago, you're going to see him climb up the board when they start talking about, all right, who's after Drake Maye and Caleb Williams and kind of that 1-2 group. When there's like the next wave, I think Michael Pratt's going to be in that mix.
I can't believe you left this guy for me. I cannot believe this.
Go for it.
This person might be in the college football playoff. He might be playing for a conference winner, Power 5 conference champion. He's going to potentially put up some big numbers in a new offense. Clemson's Cade Klubnik.
Down the board for me. Too much projection.
He's got Garrett Riley right now designing a ball play sheet for him. I am very excited about Cade Klubnik's potential here. Now, I need to see some dudes at receiver for Clemson.
Let's play a game of name that Clemson receiver this year.
Right.
Yeah.
They're going to need to have some young receivers develop. It can't all be Will Shipley all the time, handing it to him, throwing it to him. It's got to be more than that. But I look at what Garrett Riley did to that TCU offense last year with a bunch of guys who were not necessarily household names. Quentin Johnson winds up being a first-round draft pick. I think this could be very exciting. And I've said many times, when Clemson brings in new ideas, they tend to take a step forward. And I was worried that when they went internal on both coordinators last year, I was worried that it was going to get a little stale, and it sure did. I'm excited to see what happens here. I think we're going to see Cade Klubnik do quite a bit this year. Who you got next?
Well, I'm tempted to take another 5-star that we haven't really seen a whole lot from quite yet. And it's kind
I hear
of
stars matter.
The next dude. Stars do matter. And I think they particularly matter at quarterback. I'm going to hold off, though, and I'm going to go with a guy who I know is also near and dear to your heart. You spent some time with him this past week in Nashville. It's a good dude. He plays for a good dude. I'm going Mr. Yes Sir's quarterback. Give me KJ Jefferson.
Oh, yes, sir.
Give me Mr. Yes Sir's quarterback. I mean, this is a guy who you just talk about what college football is all about. I mean, he does not have, I don't think, real outstanding NFL traits, but he can just grind out games, and he's a bulldozer runner. I think he's going to honestly show an improved passing game under Dan Enos. I think maybe the transition there from Kendall Briles to Dan Enos is going to do him a little favors. He's going to be under center a little bit more this year, a little more play action, kind of setting up some, natural deep shots. So there's some banking here that some of these receivers they took out of the portal are going to hit. We know they got Rocket Sanders and some of those running backs. But give me KJ. Big season, senior season for him.
My son, thinking SEC as well, he said, don't forget Will Rogers. Maybe not here, but down the board. Very, very good call. We talked to Will Rogers last week, Mississippi State's fourth-year starting quarterback at ACC Media Days. You're going to hear from him later this week. But that's not where I'm going with this right now. That is not where I'm going. Where I am going is I think I'm going to go into the group of 5. I think I'm ready to make my foray into the group of 5 with a guy who started in Division II, came up FBS, had a chance to go Power 5, but is back at Western Kentucky.
Got a car not to do so.
Yeah, Austin Reed, Western Kentucky, West Florida, Western Kentucky, and the thought was maybe he's the next starting quarterback at some Power 5 school, but he is back with the Hilltoppers, and he put up great numbers in that offense, and I think there's a really good chance that he's going to be effective again. And, it'll be interesting to see what happens to him down the road, because this is a guy who felt like, he was under-recruited. He led West Florida to a Division II national championship and goes up a level. He wants to show that he can be an NFL quarterback. So I'm excited to see what Austin Reed can do. And so we've both met our group of 5 requirement here.
What kind of car was it that they got him that he drove onto the middle of
the field? Was it a Porsche? It was very nice.
It was a very nice car. Tyson Helton has certainly got whatever NIL deal hooked him up big there. So that's a good pick. I mean, again, there's some group of 5 guys that aren't. We'll see. Does a guy like Frank Harris, make one of the last couple picks? Grayson McCall. There's a ton of really good quarterbacks in 2023. Really good college quarterbacks, I should say. All right, I didn't take this guy last time. I'm going to take him this time. If Michigan or Ohio State aren't going to win the Big Ten, my guy is. Give me Drew Aller.
Drew Aller from Penn State, 5-star guy.
5-star guy. This is I think maybe LSU and Florida State are the only 2 teams other than Penn State that have become kind of the hype offseason teams. They returned a ton on defense. They returned Singleton at running back, Allen at running back. But I think the reason there's so much optimism around Franklin's program is that they feel like they finally have a fighter pilot at quarterback. And if you have one of these guys that can kind of, do the dang thing, Sean Clifford was nice. Sean Clifford was nice for 4 years. Seemed like he, had an extra year of eligibility every year. Finally, it's Drew Aller's time. Let the man cook.
That one's going to be fun to watch. Now, they have elite talent on their team. We're looking more at like Olufashinu, who is an offensive tackle who probably would have been a first-round draft pick had he gone out this past season. Abdul Carter coming off the edge, Chop Robinson. But if Drew Aller is really good, then we are going to be talking about Penn State not as a good team that just is a notch below Ohio State and Michigan. We're going to be talking about them as a competitor for the Big Ten title, for a playoff berth. This will be fun.
It's a 2-year window for this program. I mean, I'm not saying that it's capped after these 2 years, but the recruiting classes that Franklin has stacked up that are now going to be sophomores and juniors in 23 and 24 certainly seems like this is kind of it's crystallizing for the Nittany Lions if they're going to finally break through for the first time since 2016.
They also get Michigan at home this year, and for whatever reason, they can't seem to do anything in Ann Arbor, but they can play them just fine in State College. So, yeah, I'm very excited about that. I'm kind of shocked that this guy has fallen to me here because he's going to put up big, big numbers. Needs to stay healthy. We saw awful things happen when he was hurt and wasn't playing last year. Oklahoma quarterback Dylan Gabriel.
Okay.
UCF transfer. That offense is built to put up big numbers. We will see. Now, Jackson Arnold's sitting there behind him, and I know that's where Jesse's mind is going, that Jackson Arnold, big-time freshman recruit, but that's not the plan. The plan is not to play Jackson Arnold this year. The plan is for Dylan Gabriel to take the Sooners through their final year in the Big 12 and have Jackson Arnold ready to lead them into the SEC. Dylan Gabriel, healthy, can put up massive numbers and can help Oklahoma compete for a Big 12 title. That's why I got him on my team.
I like it. I mean, I think that I think the job's his. The scuttle around Jackson, I think, is just kind of that. It's not. It's full of kind of hot air. Dylan Gabriel back with the same OC. There's a lot of pressure, obviously, on him, Venables, that entire Oklahoma program. You've deemed it recession-proof, and last year, maybe not.
The leading economic indicators were not good last year.
They were not good.
They were not. I'm not going to lie.
We'll see what happens. All right, I'm tempted to stay in the Big 12 with a guy who I think is a whole lot of fun. Got his kind of moment in the sun a year ago on game day, then got dinged up a little bit. Plays for one of the best coaches, I think, in all of America. But I'm going to hold off. I'm actually going to go back to the SEC. Give me a guy who was beat up, tore his labrum, coming back, 35 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. The last time we saw him was a full-time starter. Devin Leary, Kentucky.
This could be the pick of the draft right here. This could be the value pick here, because if he brings Kentucky back to the level they were at in Will Levis's first year as the starter, and by the way, Liam Cohen, the offensive coordinator who was there with Will Levis that first year, is back now too. Yeah, this could be a great pick because Devin Leary absolutely has NFL tools. And I mean, we were talking about a guy who they were running a Heisman campaign for at NC State this time last year.
And Kentucky's got sneaky skill weapons. I mean, Barian Brown is like the wide receiver that no one talks about in the SEC. Tavion Robinson kind of struggled a year ago, the Virginia Tech transfer. I think he's going to be better. Their offensive line, they've kind of shuffled the deck chairs. It's 4 of the same 5 starters, but guys are playing different positions. So I'm high on Devin Leary. And I think by season's end, if it's not Carson Beck, who was not named on one of the all-SEC teams this past Friday, I think Devin Leary is going to be a quarterback that could find his way on that list.
I agree with you, and I'm excited to see what he could do at Kentucky because he can change that program's fortunes from what happened last year. My last one, we talked about him a little earlier. You said he wasn't on your board. He is on mine, and he'll be my final pick. Wisconsin's Tanner Mordecai, former SMU quarterback, former Oklahoma quarterback, threw for a bajillion touchdowns the past 2 seasons at SMU for Sonny Dykes and for Rhett Lashley. Now he goes to Wisconsin, where Luke Fickell is taking over. He has brought in Phil Longo to bring an offense that does not look anything like we've ever seen at Wisconsin. But remember that 2020 North Carolina offense when they had a couple of really good backs? Remember how good Sam Howell was in that offense with those backs? I bet Tanner Mordecai is throwing darts in this offense. I bet he puts up some great numbers.
I mean, this is again. I've spent a bunch of time with Phil Longo. He thinks that the Wisconsin fans have nicknamed this the Dairy Raid. That's what they're calling his offense. And
the Dairy Air.
The Dairy Air is even better. And so Longo liked it. He had not heard that, so he had a good chuckle when I was talking to him about it. But the last taste of Wisconsin fans of seeing Tanner Mordecai in that spring game was not good because it was pouring down rain and he threw 3 interceptions on his first 3 passes. This is a guy who was insanely productive at SMU, and they have really overhauled that Badgers wide receiver room. So that's a good pick. I think this was a good draft. Let me run you a couple names that are on my board that didn't get picked. We mentioned Frank Harris, UTSA. Grayson McCall, Coastal Carolina. Here's the guy I was going to take with my last pick, but didn't, Jalen Daniels.
Oh, at Kansas. Absolutely.
I mean, this is a guy that put up a ton of numbers before he got hurt. And then
Spencer Rattler still on the board?
Spencer was not on my board, but
still on the board. He's not
still on the board. Yes.
Hudson Card, who's reemerging at Purdue. He could have a very good season. We mentioned Cam Rising before. Jaden Delora at Arizona.
Yeah, you mentioned Will Rogers. I mean, he's a guy,
Will Howard at Kansas State, if we're talking about guys named Will.
That's true.
He's playing behind a really good offensive line. They could definitely repeat in the Big 12.
I was going to say, he led them to the Big 12 championship a year ago. So,
here we go. Riley Leonard at Duke. 9 wins at Duke last season.
What about a guy that you and I were talking with Jim Nagy, the head of the Senior Bowl? What about a guy that he mentioned that's kind of garnering some buzz? Keaton Slovis.
Absolutely, but he's at BYU this year.
Yeah,
by the way,
home.
Jesse and I are going to introduce a segment probably next week. We got a couple media days this week, so we're going to be pretty busy. But next week, I think we're going to do a segment called "Whose Team Is It Anyway?" where we just name a player and the other person has to name what team they play for now, because we could get pretty in the weeds with that one.
You could just do it for schools too. What school are they in? What conference these days?
What conference are they in?
Yes.
This was so much fun and gets me even more excited about this season because, like, we just named Riley Leonard, who was fantastic for Duke last year. He didn't even make either of our draft boards. Like, there's a lot of good quarterback play around the country this season. This is going to be a fun year.
Talia Tagovailoa.
Yes.
To his little brother. I mean, that's another one that's like, he wasn't on my board, but he's a guy that put up big numbers.
Cade McNamara, can he bring the Iowa offense out of the Stone Age?
Yeah. what is it? The march for 325.
That's right. The drive for 325.
Drive for 325. Yeah.
And then we got Jeff Sims at Nebraska now after coming from Georgia Tech.
They're gonna run that poor boy to death.
Chandler Morris at at TCU. He was gonna be the starter last year. Max Duggan ends up taking over and after the first game, and he could be very good.
Connor Wegman, 5-star.
Yes.
Bobby Petrino, wake up the offense.
Lot of talent around Connor Wegman. Yeah, there's a bunch of people that we could have picked down at the bottom of this draft. Don't feel like we're slighting them because it's tough. These decisions were very, very tough. Jesse, it's been a pleasure drafting with you. I regret losing at rock, paper, scissors and not getting Caleb Williams, but I still like my team. I
like my team too. We got to have them put it up on social side by side.
We will. Daniel Garrett, though, killing me with the Andy putting up the all beat out by my backup mid-year team.
Committed to
the bit. So
it worked out well. You do have if you don't have the best starter, you definitely got the best QB rooms.
That's right. If that had been the exercise, I'd be in really good shape right now.
Yeah.
So, Jesse, thank you so much. We're going to say goodbye. When we come back, which will be very shortly, because we haven't sold all the ads yet. So when we come back, though, Joe Ovies will join us to talk ACC, the schools that want to get out of that grant of rights, what happens, what kind of questions are Commissioner Jim Phillips going to get at ACC Kickoff, and can someone other than Clemson or Florida State win this league? Let's talk to Joe Ovies. We're joined now by the great Joe Ovies, the Ovies and Giglio show, based in the Triangle, ACC country. And man, you had a clip on your show, Joe, that came out last week, an interview with North Carolina Athletic Director Bubba Cunningham. And it was one of those, did he really say all that on the air?
That's Bubba for you, man. Bubba Cunningham has no issues laying it out for you. And Giglio and I have a really good relationship with Bubba. He's been here for a long time. He gets what we're trying to do. And if you ask him the right questions, he's going to give you the answer you're looking for. And that's what he did when we talked about ACC grant of rights.
It was very interesting and explained the whole situation better than I think I've ever heard it explained. And I've written stories on the grant of rights and interviewed attorneys about the grant of rights and all this stuff. So I was very, very impressed. So I want to play this clip. And so for anybody who doesn't understand what some of the issues at play are with the ACC and their revenue share, they're looking at a pretty big gap between them and the SEC and the Big Ten. And there are these 7 schools that have met together and tried to figure out what to do. Right now, the idea is that they change the revenue sharing model in the ACC so that if you are successful, you get some more money. But the nuclear option is you leave the conference. That would be very difficult. And here's Bubba Cunningham explaining why.
What I was saying is we know the number to withdraw from the league.
Okay.
That is a defined number.
Okay.
The number that I say is in question is the grant of rights.
Mm-hmm.
So can I buy back the grant of rights? I know the grant of rights says I've granted my rights. They've been sold to ESPN. I could calculate that number and say they own my rights from now until 2036. The payout is going to be $30 million a year. So that's 12 years. That's going to be $360 million. Let's just say that that's the number. My point is we would go to court and argue and say, well, I can't pay that or I shouldn't pay that. ACC say, well, just give us X million to get out. That's why I'm saying that number is not known.
Got it.
That's what I meant by that.
I just want a clarification on that because, somebody might take this conversation, put it on social media and, go crazy with it.
I can't believe that would happen.
No. Never, not in this environment.
And that's exactly what you did. Now, I will point out that earlier in this interview, Bubba Cunningham very clearly states that they would like the ACC to work and everybody would like to stay together. Yes. I'll point that out now. But it was very interesting him saying that because that is exactly the situation. Basically, there is an exit fee for the conference. That is a lot of money. But also, your home game TV rights owned by the conference through 2036. And what he said was the truth, though. What will happen if somebody decides to try to leave or multiple somebodies is they will go to court and they will come up with a number that satisfies everyone instead of just dragging this thing out.
It's important to know, though, Andy, that all the stuff that came out of the ACC spring meetings in Amelia Island, Florida, it's not new. We've had this conversation with Bubba Cunningham multiple times. We talked to Holden Thorpe, the former chancellor of North Carolina, during that time in which the grant of rights that they're locked into right now was signed, okay? So the grant of rights itself is only 3 pages. But you and I both know that if there was a way to get out of this grant of rights, it would have happened by now. But they can't. It's that good. I've talked to somebody who was actually instrumental in putting that grant of rights together. It's that good. So when Mike Alford, the Florida State AD, goes in front of the Board of Trustees and becomes performative with Florida State, it then trickles out on the social media where everybody goes into fantasy land, and we start getting the Greg Swames and the dude of West Virginias of the world acting as though they're plugged in. That is fantasy talk. It's cool to kill some summer segments, but there's no truth to the Magnificent Seven. These are schools. Look, shout out to Brett McMurphy, man. He's a good dude, but he just came up with a name, and that shows you the brilliance of marketing. You put a good name on it, and suddenly it picks up. But those guys talking to each other, they've been doing that for years. Yeah. Not new.
I love that, though. Bubba pointed that out, and I thought it was very astute that no one even noticed it. Ross Dellinger wrote the original story about the 7 schools meeting together. Obviously, you've talked about this on your show a bunch. I've talked about it on my show. I've written about it. I actually got the original ACC grant of rights at my old job and published it. And I have been talking to some of these schools as well, but I didn't put a fancy name on it. And Brett put a name on it, and all of a sudden, boom,
it's gone. It's out there onto the internet, and everybody's panicking. And then, of course, that leads to some interesting conversations at Amelia Island during those ACC meetings when the Magnificent Seven was born. And my guess is I really don't think it's going to be that much of a topic at ACC Kickoff. I think the commissioner and his ties as athletic director to Northwestern with what's going on with the lawsuits, that's going to be the more dominant thing that's going to take over on Tuesday. But as far as expansion or realignment is concerned, to borrow a phrase from Mark Ennis of Louisville, y'all get comfortable because nothing's changing until 2030 at the earliest.
Yeah, that's what it seems to me is basically as you get further along, then maybe that dollar amount shrinks because of time.
There's only one thing that's a new wrinkle from this conversation with Bubba Cunningham and from the Magnificent Seven business from the spring meetings. And that is Disney CEO Bob Iger going on record with CNBC, last week or the week before, saying, I'm open to selling our television properties, ABC, even ESPN. And then we get a follow-up report this past week about ESPN having high-level conversations with the NBA and the NFL about being a stakeholder in ESPN. So clearly Disney is thinking about what to do with Disney next. If I'm a lawyer, I'm looking at, we signed this deal with Disney. If this ends up going in another direction, I could see where they would want to try to break that, maybe to renegotiate for a better deal for themselves or to break up the ACC entirely. And there's one other wrinkle to this, and I'll be curious to see if schools stop whining, or not schools specifically, Florida State stops whining publicly about these things, that in 2027, the original television deal where Raycom sub-licenses these ESPN games that they don't want, which will now be
the new CW games.
The new CW games. Essentially, the games that ESPN doesn't want, that Raycom flips, is going to be on CW until 2027. My understanding is that the bump in average annual value will be rather significant. There's been some numbers out there anywhere between $300 to $350 million, but actually it could be higher to that. I've heard anywhere between 500 to 600 in terms of average annual value. Is that going to be enough to catch the SEC and the Big Ten? No, but that's not the reason why the ACC is not making college football playoffs last year. It has nothing to do with the money coming in. It has to do with coaching, some misses, Dabo not adapting, which maybe he's going to do this year with Clemson. Florida State still dealing with the after effects of Jimbo Fisher, which of course Texas A&M gets to deal with now since he's not necessarily going anywhere with that contract. So there's a lot of other issues that have nothing to do with the television contract and everything to do with schools making poor choices with their hiring or their lack of evolution, like we've seen at Clemson, which again, Dabo has tried to evolve this upcoming season.
So we're gonna talk about that in a second. I do want to ask you one question about Jim Phillips and his situation right now, because obviously he's going to be front and center. Probably 2 months ago was not expecting every question to be about his time at Northwestern, but now he's the subject of a lawsuit that has been filed, potentially multiple lawsuits by the time it's all said and done. What is he going to say?
Nothing. They put out a statement this week. That statement's going to be the thing that they point to. My guess is, again, this is my speculation, having gone to way too many ACC kickoffs to remember. Amy Yakola, who's the number 2 at the ACC, will come out to the podium and she'll lay out the parameters like she always does. And I'm guessing she will also say, hey, look, we released a statement. The commissioner released a statement related to Northwestern, and that's all that's going to be said. And any questions about that will then be pointed to the direction of that statement. I'll be curious to see if Jim Phillips does any extra interviews beyond what happens at the commissioner's forum. Maybe he does something with the ACC network with a clear directive. I don't know. Maybe Pete Thamel does an interview. I have no idea. But my guess is that his visibility is going to be a little bit more limited because of what is happening at Northwestern. And I think there's legitimate questions to be asked. I mean, we talk about culture all the time, and he talks about culture all the time, and the well-being of student athletes. That's been a consistent talking point of his as the commissioner of the ACC since he got here. He truly believes in the NCAA model, the student athlete model. He's not shy about that, even if it does seem a little antiquated, the ways of the Jedi, if you will. But if you are about that, I think there are legitimate questions of, okay, well, if that's your culture, if that's what you've always promoted, then why is it during your time as the athletic director at Northwestern was there fear to bring
multiple teams? It's not just one team. That's the part I think that really comes down on him and gives him questions he'll have to answer, maybe not to us, but to attorneys as depositions begin and that sort of thing. So it's very interesting. But the football part of the ACC is also very interesting, and I want to talk about that this year. Florida State is the new hotness. Everybody's expecting big things from them. I have always been in the mind, Joe, that when Dabo Swinney brings in new ideas, that is where you see Clemson's biggest jumps. And Garrett Riley coming in as offensive coordinator feels like an infusion of some very good new ideas.
I agree. And it'll be the ultimate test as to just how good Cade Klubnik is. But you can scheme it up all you want. Let me ask you this, Andy. This is something that Giglio and I talk about. And Giglio's been screaming about this on our shows back on the radio side of things and now on the podcast side of things. When you look at Clemson's roster, do you see the dudes at wide receiver again? Not necessarily.
No.
Not necessarily.
And now I do know they like their offensive line quite a bit this year. And the thing they've always been able to do is have the dudes on the defensive line, which is what no one outside of the SEC, Ohio State, and Michigan seem to have figured out.
Yeah. I'm with you on that, but to be as dynamic as they have been and have their run of the ACC like they typically have, there's just been better skill position players. And when I can look at the Lindy's, the Athlon, any number of on-3 previews, all that stuff, right? I keep seeing consistent, the playmakers Will Shipley. Is that good enough for Clemson?
You need your T. Higgins. You need your freshman year Justin Ross. You need all of those types of players. So,
and you can try to develop those things, but as we know, and this is why Florida State's the hotness, there's another way to go about this. If you can't do it homegrown, you go out and get those guys through the transfer portal. And that's something that Dabo was reluctant to do. Understandably, he has a way he wants to go about winning things. We're very familiar with that here in the Triangle with Roy Williams on the basketball side. He was very committed to winning a certain way. And when he couldn't do it anymore, he decided to retire. But Dabo's too young to do that, and Dabo's too smart. Dabo loves to put on this idea that he's just this yokel. Nah, man, that dude's super, super smart.
It's too late for that. He hasn't figured out that everybody looks at him as Darth Vader the same way they look at Nick Saban and Kirby Smart. Like the yokel part doesn't work anymore. Nobody's fooled. Everybody knows you're a genius. So you got to move on.
I think he finally got over it this past season. I mean, did I read correctly that they're bringing Chad Morris back as an analyst?
Listen, Chad Morris was very good for them.
He was.
Bad for Arkansas, great for them.
It gets to your point about bringing those ideas in. I'm like, all right, let's bring him in. Again, Nick Saban, trailblaze with all these analysts and all these other guys, the wayward home for former offensive coordinators, right? Maybe that's what Dabo's going to do too, and maybe they'll see a little wrinkle.
Exactly. Now let's let's talk about the other teams in the ACC. Does anyone have a chance to win this league not named Clemson or Florida State?
North Carolina does.
Okay.
And the simple reason why is because they have Drake Maye. They have the best quarterback in the ACC on the roster. But the question for North Carolina, and we haven't really gotten good answers for this in Mac Brown 2.0 in Chapel Hill, can they win enough close games consistently? Do they have a defense that can make a critical stop? Now, the big talking point coming at ACC Kickoff from North Carolina is going to be, hey, don't pay attention to the bad defensive numbers at the beginning of the year. Look at the defensive numbers at the end of the year. However, at the end of the year, they still had catastrophic plays, and I think they were 1-4 down the stretch. Right?
Because that also includes a game where you didn't outscore Georgia Tech that was playing with like its fifth string quarterback.
Yes.
So.
The other problem for North Carolina is Drake Maye, as good as he is, you know who made him better last year?
Josh Downs.
Have this year? Josh Downs. That guy was an amazing talent that I think people are truly going to appreciate. If they didn't before, they're really going to appreciate him this year. And a little bit of a running back by committee. Nobody really necessarily stepped up. I know they got 3 guys that they can necessarily go to. Drake Maye can run as well. And then you've got the Chip Lindsey offensive coordinator philosophy, and how is that going to play? My guess is Drake Maye's happy with it because Mac Brown's been very upfront about the fact that Drake Maye had a say in what direction they were going to go in at offensive coordinator.
So let's stay in the triangle. Let's move a few miles over to NC State because Brennan Armstrong comes, Robert and I is there. They've got some young quarterbacks who had to fill in after Devin Leary's injury last year. What is that offense going to look like?
Great question. You got to imagine that they're going to try to recreate that magic that we saw at Brennan Armstrong and Robert and I, 2 years ago?
So it was, I mean, they were incredible in Bronco Mendenhall's last season in Virginia. It was amazing. It was a great offense. A lot of it, I think, had to do the tight end who's with the Colts now, who they got the transfer from Oklahoma State.
Oh, yeah.
Number 0.
His name is escaping me as well.
Yes, he was incredible. But they've spread the ball around, and NC State has better talent than that Virginia team had.
Theoretically.
Jelani Woods, by the way.
Theoretically, thank you. Theoretically, yes. But the problem presented itself last year with their wide receivers and that nobody stepped up. You know, as Devin Leary, yes, he had his injury. MJ Morris looked like he could be legit. His injury. I mean, they went through 5 different quarterbacks, but they all won, obviously, including the more important one at the end against North Carolina with Ben Finley at quarterback. But the issue that NC State has had was twofold. One, you can bring in any offensive coordinator you want. Dave Doran's going to have to let go. Right. Dave Doran's been a model of consistency at NC State. Honestly, at NC State fans locally, we've had this argument a lot with them in that NC State's living the college football life that 98% of college football programs live. All right. You're going to win 8 games. You're going to win 9 games. Maybe you have a chance for the 10th. You can compete for your division. You've come up short a couple times. Everybody focuses on the Clemson portion of, well, how can we beat Clemson? They've come up short against Clemson a couple times. The ultimate reason why NC State's seasons have been good instead of great is because they've lost to Wake Forest a couple times down the stretch, right? So to me, it really is about Dave Doran letting go offensively. It's a feature, not a bug for NC State in how they go about playing, basically dragging it out, relying on the defense, suffocating down the stretch. It's not a dynamic thing. So maybe Dave Doran finally gets, Dave Doran's young, he's kind of evolved a little bit over time since he's been here for so long. He's actually one of the most tenured coaches in the ACC. People forget about that. So I am curious if they're really going to allow Anai and Armstrong to try and recreate that magic from a couple of years ago. And it also gets down to whether or not NC State does have the skill position players that can create the separation to make that go. And then we know that Brennan Armstrong is going to run a lot too. That was the one thing that Devin Leary was held against him, why he never necessarily got the hype, even though they tried to put a Heisman campaign around. And we joked with Devin Leary.
I got the hat still.
Right? Yeah, D. Leary delivers, right? We joke with Leary. It's like, hey, if you really want a Heisman campaign, you've been running on some design plays, on some design run plays. And he laughed. He knows that wasn't part of his game, but that is part of Armstrong's game. And that's going to be the most curious part about this. And honestly, what about MJ Morris? Okay. Dave Doran.
That's my question is we're assuming because Armstrong and I work together, but MJ Morris seemed to be the future.
Yes. Yeah. And that's going to be something that Dave Doran's already started to hint at. And we're probably going to get more of that at ACC Kickoff, where He truly believes in him as talent. You don't want him to transfer, obviously. Armstrong is a one-year rental, essentially, because of the transfer portal. If he can develop and get used to it, they can have a real breakout season the following year. That's the one thing about Doran that I think is underappreciated. They operate in these windows, okay? And last year, the last 2 years with that super veteran group, those were their big windows. This was always going to be a reset season for them. I think they played it the best way they could by bringing Armstrong in with an eye to see that they can make the most out of this, get some good quality reps, build that confidence to go into the following year. This is a stepping stone season for the Wolfpack, but that doesn't mean they can't have a decent season this upcoming year.
One more before I let you go, and it's, again, close to home. Can Mike Elko work another miracle? They won 9 games at Duke last year. Riley Leonard was awesome.
Dude.
Can they keep this up?
Have you seen their schedule?
Yeah.
It's not good. It's not good for them.
No, the end of divisions feels like it hurt them a little bit.
Yeah, man. So that's the thing. I like Elko. He's a good dude. Riley Leonard, fun quarterback. Okay, really fun to watch. Strength and conditioning, something that had really dropped off at the end of the David Cutcliffe era, has completely turned around. They look like they actually have the gas to go the distance, right? But they start the year against Clemson. You think Dabo is going to not have it pedal to the metal game 1 against the ACC, right? To like announce to everybody, oh, you had your little window, guys, where you thought we're back. We are going back for this college football playoff, y'all.
You're saying this is going to be the opposite of last year's Clemson Georgia Tech game that opened things up?
Joe and I have talked about this. Our friend Lauren Brownlow brought this up last week, actually, when she was filling in. It's entirely possible that Duke could have a better season, but a worse record. Because of the schedule.
Very easy to believe with the schedule. And that's something that everyone is going to have to get used to. The Pac-12 eliminated divisions in terms of figuring out who plays for the title, but didn't change the schedule because it was too late to do that.
Mm-hmm.
This is the first true non-divisional schedule we'll see in the non-divisional era. And I'm curious to see how it affects everything because we're going to see it in the SEC and the Big Ten later, but this is the first one of those.
Mm-hmm. And to the benefit, the team that's benefited the most, Louisville, actually. You asked who could be sneaky in this upcoming season. Well, if you base it on the schedule, Louisville actually has a pretty decent path. Miami's going to have theoretically a lot of run going because they don't play a conference game until week 6 against Georgia Tech. So that's there for them to kind of get things going. But honestly, I still think North Carolina, if it's not Clemson and Florida State, because of Drake Maye, has the chance. But if North Carolina's coming out on top of the ACC, they're not making the college football playoff. It's as simple as that.
It is going to be a fascinating year and a fascinating week at ACC Kickoff in Charlotte. Starts Tuesday. Joe Ovies, thank you so much for joining us.
As always, Andy, good talking to you, man.
For today's Extra Point, first of all, I want to thank you for joining the first live edition of this show. If you got to join live, if you didn't, don't worry. We're going to be doing quite a few more, including one tomorrow night. That would be Monday night, in case you're listening on Monday morning in podcast form. But Monday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Pacific. We'll be doing this again live. It'll be a Dear Andy show. For the old listeners, you know what that means. Your questions answered by me and the folks from On3. Now, how do you get a question to me? Well, that is a very good question. You can join live and you can comment on the YouTube stream and you can ask that way. Or you can find me on social media at Andy_Staples on Twitter or X or whatever they're calling it right now. Andy_Staples on Instagram. Andy_Staples on Threads. Andy Staples on Facebook. But let me give you one other option. And this is one I hope some of you guys will take advantage of because I love hearing from you, but I'd like to see you too. And who knows? We can maybe see each other on the show. So if you send an email to andystapleson3@gmail.com with a question, if you have a long question and just want to send it by email, just send it to andystapleson3@gmail.com. But if you'd like to appear on the show yourself, turn your cell phone on yourself, put it in selfie mode, shoot a video, ask your question, and then email that question to andystapleson3, all one word, @gmail.com. And who knows? Maybe we'll use your question on the show. If it's a really good question, if it's a really fun way of asking the question, because we're going to get to see you. So I want to do that. And I may or may not also use this same concept after games to let you guys get a little steam off after a loss, or maybe beat your chest a little bit after a win. I think it's going to be fun. So if you want to ask a question on video, then send your question to AndyStaplesOn3@gmail.com. Just camera on yourself, ask your question, fire away. Now remember, you are giving us permission to use that submission on the show, but that's pretty self-explanatory. But I'm really excited because I love hearing from you guys. I love your questions. It helps make this show better. It helps us figure out what we need to be talking about. And you guys are just really smart and a lot of fun. And I cannot wait to hear what you're going to ask. We'll talk to you again soon.